so you guys know this is being recorded through Zoom. I'm assuming the other schools that are coming through to the Fowler are on Zoom if they wish.
Got it.
So our job, I guess I better start with introductions. Who is this guy over here? We're going to introduce ourselves, but we would like to quickly hear about you, who you are, where you're from, and how you're in this space a little bit. My name is Mo Fonstock. I have the blessing of being able to teach social entrepreneurship here at St. Thomas. I've worked in a number of different capacities in here over the past 20 years. Led a leadership program for executive directors and nonprofits. I've taken 3 J-term trips to Mumbai, India, and worked with social entrepreneurs in Mumbai, and continue to teach both graduate and undergrad in social entrepreneurship. But let me pass this along here, and we're just gonna, these guys are all in depth around social entrepreneurship. What's happening in the Twin Cities area continues to grow, see where it goes, but we want to hear from you guys. So let's go. I'm going to go this way, and then we'll introduce ourselves, and we'll kind of start stepping into our questions. How's that sound? Because
I'm Shana Mushtaq. I'm so happy to be here. I have a couple of hats. Scott and I run a technology cooperative, a consulting organization called Collectivity. We serve nonprofits. I'm also the board co-chair for the Social Enterprise MSP organization in the Twin Cities. And I'll pass it along. Next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annalie Nordstrom. I'm the chair of entrepreneurship at North Dakota State University. So just a couple hours away from you all here. And we run a center for entrepreneurship and family business. And in that center, we do some programming for students that involves like systems thinking and driving social change. And so this is our first year. Stephanie's with me here. This is our first year in the Fowler competition. So we're just checking things out.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Meyer. I'm also from NDSU. I'm in public health. And so Annalie and I connected, and we have quite a few public health students because we teach a lot on systems thinking in public health. So it fits really well with entrepreneurship. They just don't know it yet until we show it to them. So that's kind of how I got connected with that in social entrepreneurship. So we bring that into the public health.
Great. I'm Bob Pinckney, the director of the entrepreneurship program at the University of Georgia. Serial entrepreneur, first time here at the Fowler competition. Looks interesting. And very interested in hearing what this distinguished panel has to say.
Welcome from Georgia.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maggie Myland, and I'm with Social Enterprise MSP. I'm the Program and Partnership Director, newly in the role, so very excited to be here, and also have not been to this event before, so just ready to learn.
My name is George Frimpong from Africa, Ghana, Accra, from a university called Heritage Christian College, a university with a view of changing salary earners to job owners or job creators. So we joined this program about 5 years ago, but because of COVID, we have not been able to come. I think that 2019 we were the winners. So we are here to win again.
All right.
So we have a center that trains students as part of the academic work, that trains students how to be entrepreneurs. So we had this program and we signed up to it. So that's why we're here.
welcome. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sarah Slade. I'm Matt's fiance. I work in healthcare, but I had the day off, so coming to kind of see what he does for work on the front side. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Julien Lamarche. I'm from University of Sherbrooke in Quebec, Canada. So it's our 4th year participating. So I'm really glad to come in to Minneapolis in person. And I've been a social entrepreneur when I was student. So it's nice to be able to support the students on the other side now. So really looking forward to hear you.
Hi, I'm Mary Patrick Kavanaugh, and I'm with Soka University of America, which is in Southern California, right up the road from USD. This is our first time at Fowler, and we are having a great time. We loved being at the Finnegan's event last night. It was a great kickoff for all of us. So thank you for sharing what's going on in your ecosystem.
So that's our segue, and we're gonna come this way, okay?
Yeah.
So I asked these guys a few questions. I gave them a few questions to start with, and then we're gonna open it up. Okay, so we'll have time to chat and talk. But the question I asked these guys was, what was your journey into this world of social entrepreneurship? And so maybe that's the way you can kind of tell a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Connie Rutledge. I'm currently the CEO of Finnovation Lab, which hosted the fellowship finale last night. And so first a little bit about Finnovation Lab, so you have a little sense of why I'm here. FinLab exists to support social entrepreneurs as they build their business. And we do that in a couple different ways. We've got a 10,000 square foot space that we use for co-working and events. And then we do some educational work, and the flagship program is our fellowship program, which is a 9-month experience. We take 9 very early stage entrepreneurs. And we usually attract people to the fellowship program that are really passionate about the issue area that they work on. And we provide some business training through our curriculum, leadership development, mentorship, workspace, and coaching. And then, of course, the cohort experience. And so that's what we were celebrating last night, was the 9 that have made up our 5th cohort for that program. They finished yesterday. So I ended up in this work. It's a little bit of a circle, actually, because I studied sociology, social science as an undergrad, and thought I would get a PhD in that work. And then when I went to grad school, was like, maybe this is a little too far removed for what I really want to do. And so that's when I found myself in Minneapolis. No one would hire a social theorist without a PhD. So I ended up working for a very small market research firm, and that led me into this world of entrepreneurship. We did some angel investing. I worked with that same boss to create a seed stage venture capital firm. And I got a little frustrated that none of the partners in that firm would take up these ideas that I thought were really interesting, where they were blurring the lines of capitalism and social interest. A lot of them even in renewable energy, which were pretty heavy tech-based, but it was still early stages, heavily regulated. And I ended up studying policy as a way to think about, like, how could we get more interest from entrepreneurs in these areas? But weirdly, that led me into teaching. And so I taught at the University of Minnesota for a number of years in an experiential learning program around new venture creation. And that's where I really got to start to blend these, because the students were looking for it. And they were looking for projects that were social impact businesses. And so we started to carve out at least 1 or 2 projects a year where we could create a student team to work for a local business that was impact driven. And then after that time, my husband and I have a small business that we operate, and FinLab opened up the fellowship program and then contacted me for curriculum development. So it was kind of this lovely circle. And then when I took over the leadership role there, I got to bring in my operational experience of running small businesses, bring in some perspective from investment capital, but recognizing that there are a lot of broken systems kind of in the way that we fund entrepreneurs and the types of businesses that get created. So that's how I got here.
Katie Kalkman, definitely a different way of getting into social entrepreneurship. I less circle, more falling into it, I think. My undergrad was in philosophy, but with a focus on business ethics and entrepreneurship. I am a serial entrepreneur, starting, like every kid, their like first job at like, the neighborhood, whatever, you're gonna sell whatever any neighbors will buy. And then in college, I started a little carpet company called Collegeville Carpet. We were trying to recycle used carpets, and we were selling them in squares to dorm rooms. So like that, like size of a footprint of carpet that is going to be thrown away when you're like doing a carpet like of this size of a room. Like oftentimes you're going to lose carpet. And so that was our like one of my first social ventures. Got my real estate license when I was 18 and thought I was going to do that. And so still own some properties, have been in real estate since I was 18. And my husband and I run a couple little businesses. And so I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I always identified with that. I also, when you run small businesses, they are awesome, but sometimes they don't pay as well as like a corporate job. So I've also been on the corporate side, mostly in business development roles and recruiting roles for different larger entities, Fortune 500s that are here in the Twin Cities. And so that has been like a great way for me to learn what it looks like to be inside a big enterprise organization. And then also like, what does it look like to run what is, pretty small. In all of this, I've always volunteered, and I went out to California in San Francisco, and they had this organization called Impact Hub, and it's a co-working place for social entrepreneurs. And I was like, these are my people. We need one of these in Minneapolis. And I reached out to the global community lead, and they gave me a list of like 20 people. And being in business development, your job is to like pick up the phone and call people. And this is like in my life, I'm always like, here's a list, I'll make some phone calls. And so I called all the 20 people that were on the list, and we started Impact Hub Minneapolis, St. Paul. We've been around for 8 years ago. I was in Romania. I just was looking at my phone the other day, and I got like a pop-up like celebrating the opening of our Impact Hub in Minneapolis. My team is out in Ghana right now, Accra. They were just celebrated their global conference. They bring the leaders of Impact Hubs to different locations that we have. We've got 115 locations right now worldwide. And so it's this really great network of co-working places that do different programming. Some are for-profit, some are nonprofits. A lot of them are B corporations and part of that B Corp movement. And we're, I think, like a support organization to the communities we serve. We're very locally focused, Impact Hubs, and we're of the community. So Minneapolis looks a lot different than Accra would look, or than we used to have one in San Diego. And it really is like to support the social entrepreneurs that exist there and to welcome them in and like help elevate their ideas. And we send a lot of people over to Innovation Lab. And you forgot, they also pay a living wage. So you can work on your idea as an entrepreneur. Where else can you do that? So you get great advice, great coaching, great program, and some money, some capital, which is not, most entrepreneurs aren't going to get that when they start out their idea to see if it works. And so huge fans of the program they're doing. And we'll get into this later, but there's just a ton of resources here in the Twin Cities when it comes to entrepreneurship. And so that's kind of how I fell in, and I'm probably forgetting some things, but that's what comes to mind today.
I was just saying, I always love hearing the recap of everyone's life story. So yeah, I've spent the last 10 years between the nonprofit side, public benefit corporation, and like corporate and foundation side. I always say I was the business gone rogue kid, but I was a transplant to the Twin Cities. So I moved around between the East and West Coast growing up, and then went to Michigan State for undergrad and moved out here for a job at 3M. And I got really involved in their new employee network, and they had a number of different affinity networks. And so I was really bought in on this idea of like, how can we push corporate initiatives in grassroots like movements? So HR, really focused on hiring, developing, and retaining talent. And I was like, oh my God, we have all these like people that are passionate about, whether it was our Women's Leadership Forum, our African American Network, the Latino Resource Network. And I was part of the new employee network, that I felt like we could be taking a lot of that energy from employees and really supporting broader corporate initiatives. And so at the same time, I always felt like I had to do well financially before I could do good for others. And it was really a woman who ran their foundation at 3M that was like, hey, you're really passionate about this new employee program. Would you ever be interested in moving over to 3M Gives? And that was their philanthropic arm. And so at the time, I was actually planning on taking an international assignment to Singapore. That was very much the trajectory of some of my colleagues and what I felt like I should be doing. And it was really exciting, I think, just as I was talking about liking hearing Connie and Katie's story of this exposure into social entrepreneurs. And that was eye-opening and totally changed my trajectory. And so I took that role with the foundation. I was there for 3 years and continued to get to work more with nonprofits, social enterprises, and then went on to work at one of those nonprofits called Wallen Education Partners. And so they provide scholarship and wraparound supports to first-gen college students from lower income backgrounds from the Twin Cities, but going anywhere in the Midwest region or any HBCU nationally. And then have continued to work subsequent organizations. And I think after this, I'm gonna need to pick Connie's brain a little more, because even though this says Ecotone, I realize on my badge, I'm transitioning to University of Minnesota. I've been an adjunct there for the last 5 years, but doing more experiential learning and courses.
Cool. Isn't this awesome? Great stories. Hi, I'm Scott Cole, CEO and co-founder of Collectivity. That's my day job. And as Shella mentioned, we serve exclusively nonprofits and social businesses in the region. We have had a couple of projects recently that have taken us into greater Minnesota, which is really exciting to get the rural-urban connection. And my avocational work is as a board member of Social Enterprise MSP. We started this organization in October of 2010, so winding back the clock a little bit. And I thought it would be interesting to know that the predecessor to that organization starting was a couple of nonprofit organizations in the Twin Cities, MAP for Nonprofits, which was a consulting organization, and the Nonprofit Assistance Fund, which was providing financing to nonprofit organizations. And they were hosting lunch and learns between roughly 2008 and 2010. And over 300 people during those 2 years would come and participate in these lunch and learns. 2 of those folks were board members of the National Social Enterprise Alliance organization. They started poking people in the ribs and saying, hey, maybe we should start a chapter here. And that's what came out of the ground, a new chapter. I became a founding board chair. And then our first job was to go out into the community and find out what's happening around social enterprise. And we visited all of the organizations that were in any way connected, like Net Impact and Social Venture Partners and others. Katie and I had early conversations when I think you were still up in college and under Terry Barrero's wing and talking about, hey, we want to start this thing and where can we do it? So all of these conversations led us to understand that Social Enterprise Alliance, which became Social Enterprise MSP when we kind of broke off from the national organization and founded our own 501c3, that our organization did not want to duplicate the things that were already happening in the Twin Cities. Really, really great work. So took on ecosystem building and figuring out how we could do this work as connectors, as conveners and facilitators. So our perspective on that now is how we partner, how do we collaborate with all of the amazing folks in this ecosystem in the Twin Cities and outside of the Twin Cities who can bring new ideas into this area. And when we talk a little bit about what is our organization doing a little later, I'll mention the Impact Ecosystem Collective. So off to you.
Wonderful. So now I get to send this back down, and this can be for anyone who wants to jump in. What kinds of collaboratives, what kinds of initiatives are you working on now? You're excited about what's emerging, what you're working on?
I'm happy to start.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm most excited about at FinLab right now is some collaborations that we're doing around the consumer packaged goods industry. And a couple of years ago, we did an accelerator focused on sort of mission-driven food and beverage brands. And that was a totally new area for me. I know nothing about bringing a food product to market. But the more that I sort of learned about what was happening there, it was clear there was a lot of impetus to have an impact model associated with the products that people were building. They wanted to do that, but there was a little bit of, how do I build that in and also make this product successful in the marketplace? So we've continued to kind of figure out like what makes sense in this ecosystem. So we've been partnering with Naturally Minnesota, which for those of you who may be aware of the Naturally Network, it's a national network that supports natural and organic products in food, beauty, pet, all of those consumer categories. And it was formerly, still is in many ways, Grow North was the name of the organization, which was incubated at the University of Minnesota and continues to be housed there. And so it was this recognition that we are a food and agriculture state and trying to foster entrepreneurship in that area. So that's been a great partnership for us because we have sort of slightly different networks and different experts that we can bring to bear for the founders working in that space. And as part of that, we've also started a recent partnership with Voyager U, which is another local organization here that has been helping fractional executives get their start. Have you guys heard the term fractional executive? It's fairly new to me as well.
Very small.
Yeah, a little different than a consultant, right? But it's this idea that people coming out of industry, usually larger corporations, and they want to be available, make their skill set available to startups that are growing, but they do it in a fractional way. So you can't afford a full-time CFO, but you can afford one for 1 day a week or 2 days a week, or a chief marketing officer, et cetera. And one of the things that I think is interesting about that is that it does bring the expertise into the startup world, but it's not always a direct translation, right? People coming out of large companies aren't always aware of sort of the constraints of what entrepreneurs are facing. So we want to work with them to help those would-be fractional executives really be able to work with social driven entrepreneurs, because that's the other thing, right? In the food system in particular, there's a pretty strong status quo of how you make money there. And if you're trying to do sustainable supply chains or fair labor practices or clean ingredients, like it requires a different way of thinking about manufacturing, vendor relationships. So that's one I'm excited about.
Definitely needed in the community. We're running 2 programs right now. We do what's called Entrepreneurship for Good, and it's a cohort model came out of the University of Minnesota. And now we've just make it accessible to, it's like the same program that you'd get if you were a student of the university. We make it accessible to anyone who applies. And we started up when we get about 8 to 12 people. So we kind of set goals, like our next program will start in July. We already have like the cohort pretty much established, but we're still accepting applications here through the end of June. And that program's great because it kind of meets that early stage entrepreneur where they're at, and it doesn't require a selection committee to say like you do or do not have a good idea. It just says we do an interview first just to make sure that you've got something enough that you're going to fit into the cohort. And if you're not a good fit, we will give you a different resource. Have you thought about this, that, or the other? So, and then as they exit, some of them will launch their businesses and we'll send them to other fellowship programs or accelerators in our community. Some are local, some are national, all in that impact space. And it's just a great, program that's inexpensive too. We have a lot of philanthropic funding, so we can offer it a lot of scholarships for that program. And then we do this great program. We have an internship program for social entrepreneurs. So if aspiring entrepreneurs oftentimes maybe don't know what it's going to be like to start a business, and a great way to learn how to run a business is to work with an entrepreneur who is doing that. And so we recognize that a lot of entrepreneurs running small businesses maybe will not have an intern because they can also feel like work, and then they don't get that co-actor. What do I do with this intern? Like, how do I train? There's a lot of questions that entrepreneurs might have. And so we put together a program where we do training and development for that intern, and a cohort model again, where the interns come together and they're all working for disparate social enterprises. But what they do get at the end of their summer is a community of like-minded experiential individuals. And then, they end up going back to school, coming out, and hopefully working for a social enterprise at the end of that in our marketplace, or launching of it.
Yeah, and dovetailing as Katie talked about, I've been supporting that program on a pro bono basis too with Impact Hub. And so lots of collaboration here. But aside, I've also taught a course. It's the nonprofit capstone course at University of Minnesota for social venturing in action. And University of Minnesota broadly is looking to have a lot more experiential learning, experiential education, as Connie talked about a little bit as well. And as we have other higher ed representatives in the room, would be curious perspectives of what that looks like at your institutions, because it's something we know that students are continuing to be more interested into understanding, like, what does a day in the life look like, specifically for aspiring entrepreneurs that think either I'm not, whatever the criteria is to be an entrepreneur, to understand just dealing with ambiguity and critical problem solving are skills that they can continue to build that muscle in school. And so we partner students with social enterprises, nonprofits, different organizations each semester. And that's been fun, I think, as we're kind of continually in recruiting for new organizations to work with.
Cool. Can we stick with that question a little
You
bit?
can.
Fantastic.
You
One of the things that Katie mentioned was funding that allowed them to support part of the tuition for that program. And we were all beneficiaries of a foundation in the Twin Cities here, the Bush Foundation, who has been very generous in supporting the social impact and social venture and social enterprise space. And they funded an organization from outside the Twin Cities called Halcyon, an incubator in DC that was doing nationwide study on what's the vitality of social enterprise ecosystems in 20-something cities around the country. And they finally came to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and we participated in that. The Finovation folks hosted an event there. And at the end of their presentation, we said, well, what's next? Because there were some things that were missing out of that. And we said, well, nobody had an answer to that question. So maybe we should take up that opportunity. And social enterprise MSP then continued that work in what we called at the time pre-pandemic a pillar series. They had focused on funding, quality of life, support services, and talent. 4 pillars for and now we are now calling that the Impact Ecosystem Collective. We have reignited it after the pandemic and are intentionally trying to bring in new actors, new players that aren't the familiar faces that we all see at our events and so forth. And really focused on how do we do collaborative work to lift up those 4 key areas that are necessary for entrepreneurs to thrive, particularly social entrepreneurs to thrive in this community and attract additional resources into that conversation. And then on the top line of that is how do we measure what we're doing that demonstrates we're making a difference? That's another conversation.
That's
the
another
measurement part.
deep one. This is what I want to, we've got about 20 or so minutes left. And I'm curious, I'm going to shift this. I'm going to ask these guys if they have questions or comments or areas you'd like to us to share a little bit about of what's happening here or dig in deeper with anyone here, please. And anyone, thoughts? Yeah.
I was torn a little bit wanting to go into the section on funding because I get my students through these competitions. Sometimes they win the competitions and they get a little seed funding. And I'm curious, when you have all these, you're incubating all these wonderful social enterprises, how do you help uplift them with the funding area? And how could we translate that to our areas?
It's a great question. What is the funding environment like in your area?
Oh, it's Orange County between LA and San Diego. Everyone forgets there's something between LA. and
Yeah.
San Diego. We're in Disneyland. There's lots of money.
Right.
But it's like these are small, we're students. They're just like toddling their way out in terms of a business years. And then the reality of graduates needing to make money and make a living. We don't have an impact hub in our area. We do in the Bay Area. I guess we lost Oakland's, but that's another conversation. But so
my reason for asking is it is at that lower end
Yeah.
of the food chain.
friends and family, really. And friends and family aren't always
Exactly. They're
well
not
heeled.
around. They're in some other state. They're not in
the country.
California.
Right.
So here, it's been a long road. I'm probably the oldest one. I'm sure I'm the oldest one on this panel. And the starting point for that seed funding took a long time to germinate in our market here. And it's only in the last couple of years, I would say, that we've gotten enough of the incubator programs going, and with some philanthropic money and some private sector money, are beginning to put some money into the newer opportunities at that very first stage of coming out of an incubator program. Our organization is doing micro grants, $2,500 to an entrepreneur who has an idea in a program and can do a simple 2-page proposal to say, we'd like to try this idea. And they haven't been through an incubator program, but they've got an idea, and we can provide some guidance and maybe connect them to other resources that are among the organizations that are sitting here. What about you guys?
Yeah, I think it's, funding is an internally difficult scenario. And it is for every entrepreneur, but I always say it's harder for social entrepreneurs. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, sometimes our impact businesses are really community focused and they are not planning on being a huge company.
There's no 10x exit. Right?
Yeah. And so that's kind of a lot of the funding mechanisms, even some of the support we've seen from the state of Minnesota, which is great for innovative companies, but it's still pretty tech heavy. It's still following that model of like accelerated growth. So I'd like to see us have more options for businesses that are going to create local impact, whether it's jobs or just, like I had an entrepreneur on this last cohort who it's a nonprofit, so he can at least access some grants, but it's reducing gun violence in urban communities. That's not a typical private investor kind of endeavor. And even another one, who has weighted clothing for kids who experience sensory disorder. And that's a niche market. It's a cool product. She's an occupational therapist, but it's such a small market that it doesn't necessarily fit, again, with traditional funding models. So I think some things we've seen that I think are interesting are revenue-based financing, where a couple of different service providers, Cloudburst Studio is one that comes to mind right away, a local app developer here, they will do like deferred payment on their fee. And they do it, they do it kind of based on revenue of the startup. And so you pay back with a premium, and there's still a premium attached, but if you never reach that revenue, you don't pay that part of the fee. So they're making an investment as a player in our ecosystem to support other startups' growth. And so, I think there's some interesting stuff happening with that kind of alternative financing. Venn Foundation is maybe another one. Yeah, that's working on program-related investments and trying to make those more prominent as a way to fund social enterprises. So it's just a hard thing to solve.
But I think just dovetailing like off that, one of the things we talk a lot, especially students, where you mentioned like the friends and family networks, where that is not a viable, option or path forward. Understanding like where are those nodes, whether it's with the local institution, with program leaders that might not necessarily have the right first connection, but be able to get you in a direction to find individuals that are passionate about these topics. I think that ends up at least getting students, focused in the right direction.
And I don't think we have it solved either here in Minnesota. If you ask an entrepreneur, I think they would all raise their hand and say, I have had to do 10,000 pitches to get like my $1 of investment, so what's the ROI on the time that I've spent to bring in revenue for the organization to grow their work. I mean, it is not solved here, and it's a lot of political capital. So harder for students who are brand new coming out of a university. It's a little bit easier if like they've had a success or won a competition, so that at least they have some sort of notoriety that some panel somewhere judged them and said that their idea is reasonable enough for another, maybe a mentor to come step in or a fractional executive. I mean, it is, and our culture here in the Twin Cities, for those of you that don't know us, we're very risk adverse. We like to work in those corporations, and like, innovation we are very innovative, and we don't really like to see people fail. If you're in California, you can fail and they're like, good job, try again. Here, it's like, they may not, will we ever support them again? Like, it's just, we're a different culture here. And so recognizing that we're not going to be a similar culture that you have there.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
This might be connected, and I'm kind of like putting the pieces together too, and would love to hear if you all think impact measurement is one of those solutions and challenges that people have because of that risk averseness. It's like, well, I want to know if this is actually going to be worth the investment or worth the, effort, whatever it might be. Just curious to know your perspective on impact measurement.
Yeah, I was gonna say, no, so
Yeah.
we'll be happy to speak on that. So I think really understanding like anything, like why are we doing something? Understand like two of the primary reasons that we would get at Ecotone Analytics to do impact measurement was internally, whether for the board, for leadership, to understand resource allocation and to develop strategies of really what are we best positioned to make a difference in. And then to set some KPIs and, and really track towards that and aligned with broader goals. But to say, how are we doing year over year? Are we actually getting better at making a difference in whichever domain, whether it's regenerative agriculture, affordable housing, health, education. But then there's also the storytelling piece, and that goes back to the fundraising that was talked about. And I think that's really where folks get a little leery, is like this idea of almost like gamification of impact measurement. Are we doing this to really get a better understanding and to create more impact in whichever domain? Or are we just trying to up this arbitrary number against maybe some comparison data set that really isn't necessarily apples to apples? And so that's where I think talking through whichever stakeholder we're talking to is like this important nuance of impact measurement.
I'm sure that even like Scott from your level of consulting, you probably have something to say, but I would say our measure, like what Impact Hub tends to measure most is connections. It is like meaningless almost, but it is literally what we do. We make connections every day. And I actually had a funder come in and they're like, so you basically are measuring the connections you make. And I'm like, yeah, what, is that a bad thing? But like there are so many entities in the Twin Cities that we can connect people to with great programs that seems measurable, although not necessarily always fundable. And then like, I'm sure your measurements are much more specific when you come out of like a fellowship. Where are they today? Where were they at 5 years ago? What kind of investments did they take? Did they go into a Tundra, or did they go into a Lunar Startups or a Tundra or a Beta, or what other programming do they do? And it's like, I think if you talk to any entrepreneur here, you'll in the ecosystem, because we're talking about ecosystem, you can tell that we've all worked with probably a lot of the same entrepreneurs. And that's like, you meet an entrepreneur where they're at, they may start, fail, and then move forward. And so it kind of gets, to your point, messy on like who takes credit for what. And I tend to just say, we all get credit and we all should be getting more funding, and it's not solved because it's not. And we get competitive in the funding realm for all of our organizations, but I wouldn't eliminate any organization I know in the Twin Cities. I would add to all of them, because we're going to see more success rates and more entrepreneurs succeeding if we're all able to continually not work against, but together with one another. And I do think we do that pretty well here in the Twin Cities. I don't know what your communities are like, but the more that you can do like yes and instead of trying to take too much credit and ownership, doesn't serve the entrepreneurs and it doesn't serve the organizations that are leading that help.
Yeah, the only thing else I would add relative to the measurement is that I don't know what your situations are in your markets, but at least, while it's changing now, most of our social enterprises are nonprofit with commercial businesses inside of them. So 75 to 95, depending on how you measure, you have about 150 to 200 public benefit corporations on the Attorney General's website, and some other social businesses that are for profit, but the majority are nonprofits. So their funders often don't pay them to do measurement. And so if you're not getting money to do measurement, you're not going to do measurement unless you happen to have something in your back pocket that you can put a little extra money toward and a reserve to do that. So that's the biggest challenge we've seen right here in the Twin Cities, is to convince folks to take time away from other mission delivery aspects to do impact measurement when they're not getting compensated for doing that, and there's no profit stream connected to it, is hard to do. So we're trying to change that narrative as well with the foundations, who are the top of the funnel, feeding into the nonprofit sector that's doing social impact work.
And yeah, and maybe just one more thing. As you share this, But as you talked about, like Ecotone would continually be working with different functional areas that have different goals than with measurement. So if we're talking more to marketing, communications, sustainability, they want to be able to tell that story. And we would push up against things like, well, we want to have a round number. And it's like, well, that's not what research is showing us. Versus we'd work more, on the engineering, R&D development, and they were really excited to delve into the research. But then we're talking very technical jargon. And when it's coming back to whether it's a board of directors or community stakeholders, we are talking at the 401 level, and we need to do a better job at talking, at a very broad acumen level that we can, share this with the broader community. So I think really understanding, kind of back to Scott's point of like, what is the goal out of this? And then who are the stakeholders that we're trying to talk to? And the more that we can be consistent across those different domains is like an important element.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Any other thoughts or questions that come to mind?
So I want to talk about our first team that won Team Chaco, if you could remember. What is there's indiscriminate disposal of human waste in Ghana. So what they are doing is to collect the human waste, turn into what we call sludge, and use it to produce charcoal to solve the problem of cutting down of trees. Yeah. So 2 issues, one problem solving the other. A brilliant idea. They won the prize from COVID. And prices of machines that they were going to use to set up their business skyrocketed. They couldn't get enough funding to, yes, they got some funding to support what they had, but still their monies were not enough to. And so these teething problems are there. But so if you're also, raising entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, and can also teach them to teach them to expect uncertainties. How would they be able to survive after these uncertainties? And this is a big blow because it's a global issue. And importing the machines from China to Ghana, it was so much. As we started doing the charcoal, because we tested it and got to know that the charcoal that we produce burns slower and more effective than the tree one. So people would like it, but the cultural issue of it, why can we use human waste for? It is a big issue in Africa. Because there are 2 different things. If you are doing it, go here and let's cook here. So why are you bringing them together? Nobody would be willing to buy your food.
Yeah.
Right. So that is the cultural side of it. But then the most strategic aspect is how would our entrepreneurs be able to survive global shocks? What we have brought currently is also the same thing, fertilizer to increase production of crops, food crops. Because there's fertilizer shortage in Africa, in Ghana. Government was doing its part to subsidize the ones that came. But COVID also increased the prices. And I don't want to say our uncle Putin is not listening to anybody. And we know Africa, Ghana, we import most of our fertilizer from Russia, Ukraine. And it is also affecting us. It is not even coming. The few ones that are coming, we are not able to buy. So the farmers in the remote areas are not able to get it. Say, hey, we can use our local resources to produce fertilizer. You can use a compost to produce fertilizer. But then there's another issue, which is indiscriminate disposal of human urine. People urinate anyhow in Accra, in Ghana, in Africa. This is also polluting the environment. What should we do? We can build booths, go and use it at a nominal fee. We collect the urine, then we use it to enrich the compost. Because urine, as you may know, is rich in NPK, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, that are needed by these plants that we plant. So we can collect it and use it to produce natural fertilizer, unlike the chemical fertilizer that are causing human health problems. So we can use that one to solve that problem as well. So That's what we want to do. But then it also gets to do with funding. Because you have to import the machines from China to start production. So we have started manually, but to get to a commercial sense, you can't use a normal strength. It has to be augmented by machines. So if there are other social entrepreneurs, because we also partner with schools and other institutions where we can also help them, reduce unemployment and recruit more people to help work with the factory so that we can produce in large quantities to meet the demand of our farmers. So it's got to do with funding and also cultural issues in there.
There is a funding channeling that just is wrapping up right now, but there are 5 great, funders that could probably talk about the funding ecosystem here in the Twin Cities. It sounds like they might have some ideas. I mean, they're experts in that community.
Well, I think one key thing that you said is that you started anyway,
Yes.
right? And I think like that is kind of one of the fantastic things about social entrepreneurship and innovation in general is that solving global supply shocks, right, isn't anything that a single entrepreneur can do. But by forging ahead, right, and seeing what resources you can gather that you have within your reach, right, like there's the potential for discovery, right, and for creation of something new. And I know that's what I tell the entrepreneurs that I work with is like, do what you can. Like, even if you can't raise the $200,000 that you think you need to start this thing, what can you do? Because the more you do and the more you prove that the idea has value and is technically feasible and has all of those benefits that you list, because I love ideas like that where they're solving more than one problem at a time, right? And like that, what else can you do except build the case so that as you keep pushing and looking for funding or the supply chain resolves itself, you're ready, right? And it's not just putting the idea on a shelf. So just encouragement in
So
that
we look at
regard.
social entrepreneurship like regular entrepreneurship. You still got to raise money, whether it's a donor or an investor. You got to figure out a way to be sustainable. You can't always live on grants, or maybe you can if you find the right, backing, but you got to figure out a way to be sustainable. You have to create value for your target customer, so the audience you're serving. You have to show a return on investment for what you're doing. And you have to communicate, you have to market and let people know, what your mission is, what you're doing, et cetera. And what we try to do is we look at entrepreneurship as a series of experiments, whether it's social or for profit. And if it's not working, let's try something else. But sometimes you get people who are really passionate, I'm going to solve this problem, and it may be intractable or not really something that's within their grasp right now. So let's pivot and see if we can find something to channel your energy and get something going. Because if you can't get to sustainability, you're not going to solve anything.
That's correct.
Well, and what is sustainability too? Because the market's changed, pandemic, like things shut down, up and up. So you always got to be ready for that next. I liked what you said about pivot because nothing's ever certain.
Well, and I'll just put in a shameless plug for university programs. Because I think that's one thing that universities can really prepare people for is, creating this kind of learning environment where you do know someone working in public health and you do know someone in engineering, and like trying to break down those walls between disciplines so that you can build that skill of resilience and like figuring out how do we put these pieces together in a way that's going to be sustainable and that we can actually, like, people want it and it works and we can communicate it, right? That's a tall order for a single person. And I think that's always one of the myths of entrepreneurship that I try to battle against is, you cannot know all the things you need to know to make your company successful. So I think universities can do a really great job of connecting people who think about problems differently and helping them figure out how to work together. Because it's not always straightforward, right? Like engineers don't think like MBAs. And it takes practice, like any skill. So.
And I was just going to say that I think you both talked about, continuing to like cultivate the relationships with funders or university partners, especially where you feel like you're not making progress towards milestones and you don't have that update, whether it's for funding or pro bono resources, making sure that you're still making them a part of that journey and pulling them along. Because otherwise, like you said, we get through the global pandemic and prices have changed. And now I need to reestablish this relationship. It can make it much more challenging.
We're running out of time. And this is kind of the beginning of many conversations, and I hope you will have the opportunity if you want to stay for a few minutes, if you're able, or want to talk. I think what's fascinating is there's a role for all kinds of different kinds of institutions. Whether it's startup incubators, whether it's academic institutions, whether it is, and one of the things that I've found through time, and you guys kind of reiterated it, is helping cohorts to go through the journey together. One thing about social entrepreneurs is if they build a network and an ecosystem around their idea and their efforts, they have more likelihood of success. And so how we create spaces where those relationships can blossom and move, both between expertise and funding, and through who they're serving, there's an opportunity to see where those things go. So I'm going to be careful on our time to bring this to a close. But thank you for your questions. Thank you, panel, very much for coming in and joining us. And
Our pleasure.
it's been a great
Pleasure.
Shut that down. Fair enough. So we're off of Zoom and now it's totally open conversation.
A really hard question.